Hello, everybody, and welcome back for episode 10 of Graham's Haunted Life. This week, as you can see, the title is The Colour of Death, and what that refers to is death metal artwork, and that's predominantly what I'm going to speak about this week. And I've picked out a good handful of albums out of my collection, and I'm just going to talk to you about the artwork and how the artwork affected me. Not going to talk too much in depth about the music on each particular album, just the artwork. But before I get into that, I'll talk to you about a couple of plans and a couple of things that have happened over the last couple of days. So the other day, I began recording some new music, and this being episode 10 of this podcast, I'm going to have a little break after this one for a few weeks, and I'm going to get that little piece of music that I'm recording finished up. And I'm also planning for the next round of episodes of this. What I want to do is have some guests. What I would really like to do is reach out to some of my friends and see whether they would be up for sitting down and having a conversation about a ghost story that may have happened to them. But also at the same time, I would like to reach out to sort of local musicians and maybe a bit wider than that into, a bit of a bigger sort of musician and have conversations about music. Or maybe even somebody who's involved in making horror content or horror movies or, something like that, maybe an author, and sit down and have conversations with people. Turn it into, more of a real podcast, because I know obviously you can do a podcast where it's just, a host talking about a topic, but really you want a guest. And I'm toying with the idea of filming some of these things if possible, and if not, it'll just be audio only. Now, just today, I've caused an absolute horror for my wife. I made a sandwich for my lunch, and it's a sandwich I used to make when I was younger that I call the Shaggy and Scoob. And that's purely because in my teenage years, episodes of Scooby-Doo would come on the telly, which is one of my all-time favourite children's TV shows. And as a teen, if I was just lying around being lazy and Scooby-Doo was on the telly, I would watch it just for the fun and for the nostalgia. But then it would always make me really hungry, and I would go and make some kind of crazy sandwich. And so I got into the habit of making a ham, cheese and jam sandwich, which when my grandfather heard that I was making sandwiches like that, he was a bit like, well, what the hell is wrong with you? Ham, cheese and jam? That's ridiculous. But my wife has just had the same reaction. I made myself a Shaggy and Scoob, and she said, what have you got? I said, it's a sandwich, ham, cheese and jam. And she was like, what on earth would possess you to make that combination? I don't think that's weird at all. And I think cheese and jam are quite a common thing to mix together anyway. But yeah, ham, cheese and jam, I've always liked that, and I make it really, really stacked, and I call it the Shaggy and Scoob. Yeah, she thought that was funny but disgusting. Let's get into talking about some of this death metal artwork. When I was a teenager, my main thing musically, I've always liked a vast range of different styles of music, but as a teenager, the main thing was like punk, and as my teens wore on, it became like hardcore punk, and then towards the end of my teens, like thrash and death metal started to come into the mix a little bit. And what really sort of draws me in with death metal is a lot of it has like ridiculously colourful artwork, really cartoonish, but at the same time like full of some really horrific imagery. And that's like my favourite aspect of death metal. It's the tongue-in-cheek aspect of it, and the artwork from death metal, from the world of death metal, and really sort of just gets into my imagination. I absolutely love it. So I've got a pile of CDs here, and as I'm going through them, you might hear the clattering of CD cases, but it's all good. So I'm going to start with the obvious. I've picked out my three favorite Cannibal Corpse albums, and they're my three favorite albums of theirs to listen to, but also to look at. So the obvious one being Eaten Back to Life, their debut album. The scene on the front, I remember the first time I saw that picture, and that is probably my first encounter with death metal. And I think a lot of people's first encounter with death metal probably is Cannibal Corpse. Um, yeah, I saw the cover art as a teenager, and I remember thinking like a little bit of there was a little bit of trepidation about venturing in and seeing what exactly this album entails, because that artwork to a teenager is quite like it's quite nasty but enticing at the same time. So it's, obviously a scene in a graveyard, um, with a zombie-like creature in the foreground eating his own guts and holding a little stack of his own rib cage. Yeah, absolutely brutal artwork by Vincent Locke, who I think, does every single Cannibal Corpse album cover. I'm not sure if there are any that he hasn't done. But yeah, Eaten Back to Life, that artwork, first time I saw it, was kind of where I realised, like, yeah, hardcore punk and stuff is like my thing, but I think there's a rabbit hole I'm about to really dive down here into the world of death metal. And for a while I did dive down that rabbit hole and sort of leave hardcore punk behind, but nowadays pretty much all of the music that I listen to exists side by side. And, you know, I can listen to a death metal album and then in the next sort of breath be listening to some contemporary folk. And as a teen or into my early 20s, I tended to sort of have a vibe for a while, and that's all I would listen to for a little bit, and it would be like a month or two, and then I would go on to a bit of punk, and then I would go on to a bit of folky stuff, and then I would go on to a bit of like hip hop or something like that. Yeah, but yeah, I really dove into the world of death metal. Now the next Cannibal Corpse album is Tomb of the Mutilated, a little bit of a darker album cover, and at the time I would have been late teens when I saw it. I was like, Jesus, that is graphic, a half rotted corpse eating out another half rotted, slashed up corpse, at the edge of some kind of crypt. It's pretty graphic stuff, and the music inside, like this is the third album by Cannibal Corpse, and the vocal development from Eaten Back to Life to Tomb of the Mutilated is insane. The low, deep, guttural vocals that Chris Barnes was putting out at this time, that's what death metal should be to me. Eaten Back to Life was very much still like thrashy, even though those vocals did push it beyond being a thrash record. It was still very much a thrashy kind of sound, where Tomb of the Mutilated is just pure death metal. Like death metal as I conceptualize it in my head. Now, the third one I've picked out, I spoke about quite recently, Evisceration Plague by Cannibal Corpse. And that beautiful artwork that's really dark, and you can just see these sort of zombie like figures emerging from the darkness of the background. And I won't speak too much about this one since I did in a previous video, but it's obviously a later album by Cannibal Corpse from 2009. So by this point, Chris Barnes is gone, long gone, and George Corpse Grinder Fisher has been at the vocal helm for a good handful of years, and this album is just solid. Crisp, really nasty riffing, and Corpse Grinder's vocals again, kind of quintessential death metal sound to me vocally. Absolutely beautiful. Now I've got another album here that I absolutely love, and I saw You remember that documentary, Metal Headbanger's Journey? I saw the album cover on that documentary when the guy presenting the documentary sort of wheeled it out and said that it was one of his early death metal sort of favourites. I've got Severed Survival by Autopsy. And I've got a really nice deluxe edition CD with 2 discs and like alternative artwork and stuff. So the original artwork is in here, and it was like I really love that as well. It's a mutilated body being pulled in every which way by hooks and blades and whatnot, with the logo for the band emblazoned above it. But the artwork that's on the actual front of the CD is just one of my favourite death metal paintings of all time. It's absolutely beautiful. So it depicts, against a blue background, a bunch of surgeons leaning over an operating table, but the surgeons are very, very much zombie-like, and there's blood dripping everywhere, and one of them's holding a scalpel and stuff. And it's just absolutely brilliant painting. Like, I don't get tattoos like that relate to bands anymore. I've got a couple from when I was a teenager, and they're like punk band logos tattooed on me and stuff. I would consider getting one of these like zombie-like surgeons tattooed on me at some point. I might have a good think about that and have a think about where I could get it, because the one that's holding the scalpel, I think, would make a really cool tattoo somewhere. But yeah, Autopsy, Severed Survival, brilliant album. The vocals of Chris Ryford being the drummer, like doing a death metal band where your drummer is the vocalist, is pretty unique. I don't know too many bands that do that. But yeah, absolutely love Autopsy, and that's my favourite album of theirs. Very death doom at points, and I know Autopsy's later stuff is very much death doom, but that was kind of like they snuck in some Sabbath riffs here and there throughout that album. Absolutely brilliant. Now I've got a French Canadian record here, Considered Dead by Gorguts. Gorguts are a brilliant band. Luc Lemay, I think, is a classically trained musician, so the composition on any Gorguts record is absolutely brilliant. But as I said, I wasn't going to talk too much about the music. It's the artwork. Now, the artwork on Considered Dead shows a tomb, a crypt, and a tomb, and a sort of skeletal figure emerging from this, stone tomb. And then there's some kind of weird creature thing lurking off in the background. But the colours are so vibrant and so rich. It's the walls are kind of pinkish purple with bits of red viscera all over, and the floor of this tomb has leaves that have blown in from outside and stuff. Rotten autumn leaves have blown in. But it's a weird thing with death metal. The artwork looks so colourful and cartoonish, and at the same time so sinister. That's just what does it for me. It's absolutely brilliant. Next one, another band from Buffalo, and they came out around the same time as Cannibal Corpse, and they probably didn't get the recognition because Cannibal Corpse was getting all of the buzz and recognition. But Baphomet, I've got the album here, The Dead Shall Inherit, and now I've heard that the artwork on this gets a bit of stick, but I think it's brilliant. I know it's a painting, but it almost looks like a colour pencil drawn. I might look in to see whether it is, but it does look like a coloured pencil kind of drawing. And it just shows two or three ghoulish kind of figures crawling through the grass towards what looks like a cemetery gate with some trees and the moon in the background. And it's a brilliant album. I love the bass. The bass tone on this album is brutal. And it is quite reminiscent of early Cannibal Corpse. They're from the same area, same scene, making the same kind of sound. That makes sense. Brilliant album. I've got one here that is more of a grind album than a death metal album. I've got Horrified by Repulsion. Now, in around 2010, I'd gotten into this band called Black Breath, and I started searching for Black Breath on YouTube, and this song came up called Black Breath by Repulsion, and obviously that's where Black Breath got their band name. But I hadn't heard of this band until that point, and so I played it, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing! I need to get hold of this whole album." Like, the artwork is so simple; it's just a zombified face with a missing eye and a good section of its lips missing, baring its teeth. And that's all it is. It's just a face with the band logo, and the album title. It's so simplistic, but it's so cool. And I remember, like, I'm 38 now, so I don't often discover new music and feel this like real buzz and excitement anymore. Not the way you do when you're like late teens and early 20s and stuff. And I think, what would I have been then? Maybe 21 or something when I first heard of Repulsion. It's just one of those bands that slipped through the cracks because I could have heard of them at any point throughout my teens. Um, yeah, brilliant album. Like, rapid pace, short, sharp, and nasty sort of grind. But I thought that the artwork was worth mentioning in with the death metal lot because it is, it's so similar, and it does ride a line between grind and death. Now we'll go to Sweden for this one. I've got Left Hand Path by Entombed. Another one where the colours are like, the painting is almost cartoonish, but it is quite sinister. You've got this really deep gorge depicted in a wooded area, and off to the left is a gravestone with that famous line, like carved in the gravestone, "Rest in festering slime." Yeah, Entombed are one of my favorite death metal albums ever. One of my favorite death metal bands ever, and this album is definitely my favorite of theirs. I do love Wolverine Blues as well, but it's sort of, you going towards that like black and death and roll type of sound, very much like Black Breath, the band I was talking about earlier. But yeah, Left Hand Path by Entombed, brilliant artwork and brilliant music inside. And the last one I picked out, because I just grabbed a handful of records, is Verminous by the Black Dahlia Murder. Now, I love the Black Dahlia Murder. I got to meet Trevor and Shannon after one of their shows in 2012 in Newcastle. And Trevor, sadly, passed away a couple of years ago. And I love all of their albums, but I've picked out Verminous because I think Verminous is one of my favourite of theirs in terms of artwork. This vibrant green, toxic looking water coming, like, cascading over ruined sort of buildings, ruined, almost looks like a fortress. Yeah, just absolutely beautiful painting. I don't actually know who did the painting. I'll have to open this up and read it at some point soon, but yeah, just a classic example of death metal artwork from a more modern band. A lot of bands that do death metal nowadays, they don't quite hit me with the artwork the way that old school bands do. But the Black Dahlia Murder all have this sort of all of the members have this like rich history of like being fans of classic death metal. So a lot of their albums do have really good, rich death metal, like painted artwork. There is one of their albums that I absolutely detest the artwork for, Miasma. I do not know what was going through their mind when they picked the artwork for that album. It's awful. But that's only one album in a massive pile of albums that have brilliant artwork. So, everybody can have one little mistake, I suppose. But yeah, Verminous, the artwork on Verminous is absolutely beautiful. And the album came out in 2020 during lockdown. And I was really struggling when we were in lockdown. And this album came out, and it was something that I could sort of put a bit of energy into, taking in the album, listening to it, enjoying it, poring over the artwork and stuff. And it just brightened up my life a little bit when I had been struggling. It was just like something new comes along from one of my favorite bands and gives you a little bit of a lift in a dark time. And that sounds weird saying that, like, a death metal album and its brutal artwork lifted me up and made my mood a bit better, but it did. Okay, now that I've rambled on about death metal artwork and probably haven't made a great deal of sense, you know, I'm gonna move on to something else. I've just been watching today, this morning, a channel that I used to watch quite a lot called Old Time Hockey, and this guy, you know, makes these really nice rustic sort of videos of him and his dogs going out on camping adventures and stuff, and he makes this, he creates an atmosphere, really calming voice, and tends to do a bit of like cooking and stuff. There was this one video I watched that was like a Halloween special, and he told a little tale about, you know, where the term jack-o'-lanterns come from and stuff, and he cooked a really nice looking meal and stuff. So the plans for today, it's Sunday now, but it'll be Monday when you listen to this. The plans for today, as it cools off this afternoon, take the dog for a little walk, and then what I'm going to do is cook a really nice meal, and we're going to sit and watch a horror film together, me and my wife. There's no better way of spending a Sunday than having a nice meal and picking a film to watch and get nice and relaxed and calm for a Sunday evening before having to go back to work. Thankfully, we've got 3 weeks, and then we're both off work for a little bit. I am very much ready for a little bit of time off work, especially with it being so hot. I just want to be able to relax a bit, Right. Now, I had said that this is the 10th episode, and I'm going to take a couple of weeks off recording Graham's Haunted Life to get some of my music for Dark Life recorded. And you'll probably have seen the channel name I've changed to Dark Life Recordings, and the picture on the profile says Dark Life Recordings, home of Graham's Haunted Life. I'm going to start getting some of my music uploaded again. So over the next couple of weeks, there'll be some of my tracks going up with their artwork and stuff, and maybe a little bit of a description about the track and stuff like that. And I'm going to upload my full-length album, Violent Nature. I'm going to get all of these things uploaded, and I'm going to record some of my new music as well. And as I have done a couple of times in the past, I've put bits of music on the end of episodes. I'm going to do the same today. Since I spoke about death metal stuff, I'm going to play a track of mine that's called Dead and Forgotten. Now, it's not death metal, really. It's doom and drone, but that title's fitting considering the fact that I spoke about death metal. So I'll have a couple of weeks off, and then I'll see you back here when Graham's Haunted Life gets back on the go. But without further ado, let's play my track, Dead and Forgotten.